Hey folks, before we get started, first things first, the information in this video should not be interpreted as legal or financial advice. Every deal can be impacted by regional legislation, deal specifics, and other unique variables. Always consult with a qualified legal professional in your area before you take action. Hey everybody, how's it going? Seth Williams here. I'm sitting down with my friend Eric Scharaga, and we're talking about something that I think a lot of land investors, or really anybody who is selling a property with seller financing, something that kind of gets overlooked that shouldn't be overlooked. And that is this idea of originating your loan so that it's worth the most if and when you ever decide to sell that loan to another investor. The reason this is important is because when you think about what you need to do to originate your loan properly. And originate, if you don't know what that means, it just means creating a thing. So like finding the borrower, getting the right information, getting the right loan documentation, making sure it says all the right stuff, basically just checking all the boxes in your closing checklist. The reason it's important to do that is because you want a quality product, whether you hold this loan long-term and you never sell it, or you want to sell it immediately after you close on it. Either way, these things are going to serve you really well. And I know when I was getting started, none of this was taught to me. I mean, zero. It was just a very brainless, don't check on anything, just sign documents, do it, just start collecting money. And the reason that I think that's problematic is because when you're not doing any verification or any investigation on your borrower, things do get missed and people do stop paying and your default rate is much higher. It's just a huge hassle for a lot of reasons. And when you go through these steps, you'll kind of avoid a lot of those potholes along the way. So, Eric, welcome. How's it going?
Thank you, Seth. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, me too. And I'll just say, since I met Eric, I have gotten so much smarter about all this stuff. I've learned a ton from him. This guy, he's pretty much a genius in this realm of note investing, note buying, note selling, note originating, and as it relates to the land investing business specifically, which is, at the time of this recording anyway, there's not a lot of people out there who meet all of those criteria. So Eric is a really valuable guy to know. Very knowledgeable. If you're a land investor and if you're selling properties with seller financing, Eric is a very good person to know. So aside from what I already mentioned there, Eric, about the importance of originating your loan for maximum resale value, anything else come to mind for you in terms of why that's important?
Well, resale is super important. And what I think that most people overlook is that they think when they originate the loan, they think, I'm never going to need cash in the future and I'm going to hold this thing forever. And things happen in land investing. The one thing I've learned is that there's always a situation where you see an amazing deal and you want to purchase it, but you might be short on the cash. And that's when you decide, well, I have these notes, I might want to sell these notes. And if you want to sell them quickly and for maximum value, originating them correctly is extremely important. But there's another issue here, and that's the legality of your loan. You want to make sure that your loan meets state and federal guidelines. And also, if you have a default, your loan was originated properly and you follow the correct steps in order to deal with that delinquent borrower or a borrower who has defaulted.
Yeah, that's actually a great point about the liquidity issue. I mean, that really is the biggest drawback to doing seller financing at all, is the fact that you can't get your money back very quickly. You got to wait for it. And that's absolutely right. I mean, if you are ready and willing and able to sell your note if the need arises, that's a huge advantage to have. And if you don't follow these steps that we're about to go through, your options are going to be severely limited. So this is super important stuff to know. So in terms of the things that need to be done as you are finding a borrower, as you're qualifying them, as you're preparing the documents, gathering the information, making the decision, getting everything in order, let's just go through the list. So what do you think is the first thing that needs to be done or done correctly as you're going through this process?
So when you first decide that you do want to sell or finance your property, whether you want to keep the loan or not, I would say that the first thing you want to do is make sure you're selling at a market value price. I would say don't inflate your price too much, and definitely do not add the interest into the sale price of the loan. I've heard this referred to as baking in the interest to the sale price. And what people do, or what I've seen done, is that they will charge no interest on the loan. They will just artificially increase the sales price. That's going to be tough for you if you want to sell, because you're going to have to take a huge haircut on the sale price, sometimes up to 50% of the balance of the loan. So keep in mind that buyers usually want to pay a maximum of 65% investment to value. So they don't want to pay more than 65% of the value of the land for the loan. And that's because if, heaven forbid, they do have a default, they want to make sure, for them, they're in a state that they don't know, in a market that they don't know, where they don't have contacts, and they're going to have to figure all of that out. So they want to make sure that there's plenty of equity there if, in fact, they do have a default.
And just to clarify one thing, so you said 65% of the value of the land, not of the loan balance, right?
Correct. So there's two metrics here that I usually follow. The first one is investment to value, which is what I pay versus the value of the land. And then there's percentage of UPB, or unpaid principal balance. And typically you'll find that most land note buyers are probably, if it's originated correctly, going to be in about the 70 to 75% range. Now, I know that everybody wants to receive 100% of their balance, but there's an issue called the time value of money. And as we collect payments over time because of inflation, those payments lose value. And that's why note buyers are going to want a discount. Note buyers buy on yield, and yield typically requires some type of discount in order to get the buyer into that yield range.
Cool. All right. So first key point is, I guess the ideal scenario is that you're selling this thing at market value, maybe a little below that and charging interest, but not trying to, collect all your interest up front and charging 0% interest by selling for an inflated sale price.
Correct. The next thing that I would recommend is always get a copy of a credit report for the buyer. I think that credit scoring, if you're not looking at income and debt to income ratios, is extremely important. And remember, there are trillion-dollar businesses, lending being the biggest one, that are completely revolved around the credit score. Now, I recognize that not everyone has access to credit, and that's okay. But what you can always do is just go to the buyer and say, hey, I'd like to see a copy of your credit report. Can you pull one from, say, one of the sites like freecreditreport.com, because I want to check your score. And if they object to that, I would just say, well, this is kind of a high risk for me, and I want to make sure that you have an appropriate credit score. And I follow a credit matrix that I know is part of the program. And what I do is I just follow that matrix, and the lower the credit score goes, the higher the down payment requirement, because the best predictor of how this buyer is going to perform in the loan is what they've done in the past. So make sure you get that credit report, match it up with the matrix. Also make sure that you get the borrower's phone number, email, and primary residence address. That's going to be important for the loan servicer. And that's also important if there's a default, because you're going to have to contact the buyer. So keep in mind that in terms of what I recommend, I don't do what's called a full documentation. I'm only looking at two things. I'm looking at credit score, and I'm looking at down payment. So the next important thing that I look at, or that you should take into consideration, is your interest rate. I know that buyers want the same interest rate as like the 30-year fixed mortgage, but we're in a much different lending space. We're not Fannie Mae, and we can't do 6% loans. So what I recommend is 10% interest across the board. And if a buyer objects to that, what I always say is, well, commercial loans, and this is effectively a vacant land loan is a commercial loan. Commercial loans are at 8% right now. And furthermore, you're not doing any income documentation. So because of that luxury and the ease of getting a loan, the interest rate is going to be a little higher. And I also remind them that there's no prepayment penalty here. So you're only paying interest on the amount of time that you're using the loan, and you can pay it off at any time.
I understand your reasons, but why do you not charge a prepayment penalty on your loans?
Because really the goal of lending is to get the money back as quickly as possible. And if I'm buying a loan at discount, if I get the money back, and for a land investor, if you've purchased the land at discount and you get a full payoff, wouldn't you want that? The full payoff is going to be a much greater gain than any prepayment penalty that you might charge, because it's going to allow you, if you get the full payoff, to go out and buy 2 more land parcels. So I never charge a prepayment penalty because I always just encourage people to pay off the loan as quickly as possible.
And when you mentioned this is basically like a commercial loan, how is it like a commercial loan? Is it like the risk tolerance, or what's the similarity?
Well, the similarity for me is that vacant land is in a different class than residential. It's not, now I'm not an attorney, but to my knowledge, it does not fall under the Dodd-Frank lending guidelines, because vacant land is exempted and commercial loans are exempted. If the individual is not going to be living on the land, it is deemed an investment, which would not fall under the Dodd-Frank guidelines. And any type of an investment loan is considered a commercial loan.
And that is one important note is there's a lot of, I guess, BS, for lack of a better term, that a residential seller financing person would have to go through because they're dealing with houses with Dodd-Frank and people that are living in them and all this stuff. And a lot of that stuff, I mean, pretty much all of it, for most intents and purposes, does not apply to vacant land. And that's why it's important to specify everywhere you can that we're talking about residential vacant land with no dwelling on it, just to document the fact that this is a different class of property and it's not subject to all those same rules as, a normal house per se.
So the next thing that's really going to affect your resale value is the term of the loan. And you want the term to be as short as possible. I always recommend 96 months max. Remember, we're not Fannie Mae, so we're not really in the business of giving a 30-year mortgage. So a short term and a high interest rate at 10% are going to be the 2 most important factors in your resale amount, or reducing that deduction from 100% of the loan balance, keeping that as small as possible.
So when you say short term, so what is a short term? Like what would you say is the maximum number of months or years that this thing should go on before it's paid off?
So I usually cap mine at 96 months. Now, you might want to go a little higher than that if you have a very high balance, because if you have a $100,000 balance, that's going to be a huge monthly payment at 96 months. But typically, the shorter the term, the better the resale for you.
And when you say you're willing to go higher, so what is like, I don't know, the highest you've ever gone, or the highest you would ever go in terms of how many months it could take to pay that thing off?
The highest I would ever go would be 10 years or 120 months.
Okay. And what would have to be true for you to be willing to do that? Like, is there a certain loan amount that would permit that, or?
I think it would have to be based on an interest rate. I might increase the interest rate a little bit if it was allowed by the state usury laws. But typically, I aim for 96 and under no means 120. You could do 120 months with a balloon, although I'm not a big fan of balloons. I always try to work with the buyer to make sure that it's as short a term as possible, because we're not really in the long-term finance business. We want it to be paid off quickly, because in some cases, people are going to be building on it. And in order for them to get a construction loan, they're going to have to pay off our loan, which means that the shorter the term, the better.
So would you say, like, on most of your deals that you get involved with, is the term like 60 months, like 5 years, or like what would be a normal or an average for you?
It depends on the loan amount. So I would say sub 50,000, probably in the $25,000 to $50,000 range, 60 months cap. But then above that, I'll go up to 96 months.
Now, I wonder if maybe you could make a term matrix as well as the credit down payment matrix, just to understand, like, hey, if it's this amount, this is the term. Or maybe it just depends on the borrower and what they want the monthly payment to be. I don't know.
I think you can be flexible. I have no problem going to 96 months with a lower amount, like a $25,000 loan going out to 96 months. The yield is going to be similar whether you do 60 to 96 because of the actual balance of the loan. Typically with that amount, I like to ask the buyers to make as large a payment as they can afford.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally what this is getting at is just the further you go out, the more the uncertainty about what's going to happen. Like, what is life going to be like 1 year from now? We can probably have a pretty good guess at that. 5 years? I don't know. 7 years? 10 years? 20 years? Like the further it goes, you just don't know. I mean, people can die. People can lose their jobs. All kinds of stuff can change. So is that kind of what's living behind the getting it paid back as soon as possible idea?
Absolutely. That's a great point. You don't know what's going to happen with someone's financial situation, and it's better for them to get it paid off as quickly as possible, especially since for them, it's an investment.
And on that point, I know in my previous life, in my job, I did SBA 504 loans, which is a type of commercial loan that had a fixed term of 20 years. And I can tell you, like, at least 80% of the time, these things did not go the full 20-year term. Like something would happen. Either they would default or they would sell their business or they'd refinance or something would change. So it kind of gets to that point of like, the further out you go, the less likely it is that things are going to go according to plan. So it makes sense. In terms of down payment, is there like a minimum down payment you're looking for or anything like that?
So I always aim for 20%. If the borrower meets my credit requirement, 20% is the minimum, just because I want to make sure that they have the financial capability to make that type of down payment and that commitment to the deal. The bigger the down payment, the better. If you could get 30 or 40%, that's even better, because the greater the down payment, the less likely the buyer is to default.
Is there ever a circumstance where you would take less than 20%? Like what would have to be true for you to be okay with that?
Yeah, I would try not to. I'm not a fan of 10%. You as the lender, as the seller, you can do whatever you'd like. I guess if somebody had above a 700 credit score, I would consider it. But I would have to get into the reason, like, do they not have the money? If they're struggling to come up with the 10%, how do you know that they're going to be able to make the monthly payment of $500 or $600 or $700 a month over the entire term? So if there's a real reason there why they can't make the 20% down, I'd kind of look at that, but I'd be hesitant.
No, it makes perfect sense. And just to push it to an even more ridiculous level, is there ever a situation where you would take 0% down? I know these nothing down deals are something that real estate investors talk about a lot, but it sounds like that would just never happen with you. Is that accurate, or would something ever make that okay?
So I see those being advertised all the time. No credit check, no money down. And I just shudder when I see those, because I can pretty much guarantee you, in my experience, at least 50% of those loans will default. And default is a huge pain, and that's something that you always want to avoid. I would never, ever, ever allow a buyer to purchase a property with 0% money down. Even with an 800 credit score, I wouldn't agree to it. I mean, no bank would ever do that. The minimum down for a regular bank is 20% for a commercial loan. Why would we not require that?
Taking a note from banks, I mean, there's a reason why banks are profitable over the long term. There's a reason that they have survived for as many centuries and millennia as they have. It's because they follow rules that work. So if it's working for them, maybe some of that will work for us. So some good logic behind that. A few minutes ago, you were going to start getting into the mortgage and deed of trust stuff. Did you want to transition to that?
So I was going to say that I usually do not escrow for taxes. I just check them online. And here's why. With most servicers, they're going to charge you $30 a month for servicing if you include an escrow. And I like to keep the servicing as cheap as possible for the buyer, because they're going to be paying for it. And typically with land, the taxes are like no more than a couple $100 a year, maybe $500 a year, 600 up max. And so what I do is I just check that they're paid online. And I also include a clause in my note that says that the buyer is going to pay the loan servicing fee, but if they don't pay any of the bills required for the property, that they have to pay for any increases for escrow impounds. So if I have the right under my note to add an escrow that the buyer is going to pay for, and if I see that they're not paying the taxes, I'm going to pay them. I'm going to forward those paid receipts to the servicer, and I'm going to inform the servicer that they should open an escrow for the taxes. The next really important thing would be to your paperwork. I recommend that you do not handle the paperwork yourself. Do not just use like a boilerplate agreement, because I do deals in a lot of states, and a lot of states have different requirements. Like I just ran into one this week in Montana. Montana has a law that if you sell more than 40 acres, you're required to go through a judicial foreclosure. You cannot use a deed of trust. And so there are so many small nuances to individual state laws with lending that I recommend that you turn it over to either a title company or a lending attorney to prepare your paperwork. And once you have it prepared one time, you can use it over and over because you know that it's going to be correct for that state. The other thing that I recommend that you always do, always, is close through a title company, because the title company is going to provide you with what's called a lender's policy, and the buyer is going to pay for this. And a lender's policy is essentially a title policy for your loan that guarantees that you have a valid lien on the property that is in first lien position. And this is a huge selling point if you go to sell the loan, because it's going to make your buyer feel very comfortable from a title perspective that if anything were to come up, they could file a claim through the title company that is insuring the lien. The next thing that I recommend that's extremely important is using a professional servicing company and having the buyer pay the monthly fee. I cannot stress this enough. The servicing companies are awesome. I use several, and they do so much work for $20 a month. They're taking care of tax forms. They're collecting payments. They're distributing payments. They're keeping all of the books, all for $20 a month. And the best part is that the buyer is going to pay this fee. It's going to be in your agreement that they pay the servicing. You're also going to have a complete pay history from the first payment that you could hand over to your buyer and show them that the buyer has made all of these payments for 6 months, for 6 years, and that's going to make them feel very comfortable with the deal. You don't get that if you're using, just doing it on your own with a spreadsheet. It's not going to be as organized. So make sure that you keep electronic copies of all of your documents for inspection by the buyer. And that's going to include the HUD, and the HUD is going to show the down payment. It's going to verify all of the numbers that you presented to the buyer, your note buyer, when you told them about the loan. What's very important about the documents is that you want to keep the original wet sign note in a very safe place. Do not lose that, because in most states, you need to have the original wet sign note for the foreclosure if you do have a default. So keep that in a safe, keep it in a safety deposit box, make sure you know where it is. You can use a scanned copy to share with people, but you need to be able to verify. In a lot of states, you have to sign an affidavit that you have the original note. The other thing that I recommend is that you charge a $500 loan fee at closing, and all banks do this. They actually charge a lot more than the $500. They charge a percentage of the loan amount, and your $500 loan fee can cover the cost of, having an attorney or a title company prepare those loan documents.
One question on that, Eric. So if your closing costs are, say, I don't know, $1,500 or $2,000 or whatever they might be, do you just have to eat that extra $1,000, or is there ever a situation where you would charge more than $500 for that closing fee?
You can charge whatever you'd like. I think it's just a case of, are you going to be able to explain to the buyer a $1,500 loan fee? They may object to that. And I think that the higher you get in that fee, the more that they're going to be like, $1,500, come on, it's only a $50,000 loan. You could, in theory, do that, offset all of your closing costs with the loan fee. I don't, though. I just charge a flat $500, and I've never had someone object to that.
Are there situations where you have to pay for a chunk of that, of the closing costs?
Yes. So I always have to pay closing costs. So you're going to have to pay your title charges. The seller has to pay for a owner's policy for the buyer. That's the norm. You're going to have to prorate the taxes. You're going to have, in some cases, realtor fees. That's going to be your biggest closing expense. So, you are going to have some fees there. The other thing that I recommend that you do, and you're going to have to tell the title company about this, is charge the prepaid interest from the date of the closing until the date of the first payment. And all of the banks do this. What that is essentially is that it just covers the interest until the first payment. If you don't have a payment due for, 45 days, the buyer is going to be paying that 45 days of interest until the first payment is due. And that could be a nice additional offset for your closing costs. So next, I'd like to talk about some provisions that I highly recommend that you communicate to either your attorney or your title company to have in your note and mortgage or deed of trust. The first one deals with the actual land. You want it to be very clear that this is a vacant land property, and the key here is with no improvements. Okay, that's an important Dodd-Frank issue. This is an investment purchase that needs to be in your note. The buyer has another property that they're using as their primary residence, and this loan does not extend to any improvements. The loan is only for the land. That's important because it's a Dodd-Frank issue. I also highly recommend that if you have an LLC buyer, that you put in personal guarantee language, which just means that there's a default. You have the right to get a judgment against both the LLC and the individual. And either your title company or your attorney will know how to do this. The other thing that you need to make sure that's in there is what's called power of sale language. And that just means that if there's a default, you have the right to sell the collateral property in order to recoup your loan amount. It's pretty standard in almost all of the instruments, but you just want to double check that it's going to be in there. Next, in commercial deals, I include what's called the default interest rate, which is not critical, but I always recommend it because it's pretty standard in commercial deals. And it just says that if the buyer defaults, you are going to change the interest rate from 9.9% to 15.9% until the default is cured or until the property is sold at foreclosure sale.
Does that take the place of a late fee? Is that essentially what this is, or is there an additional late fee on top of that?
No, I charge an additional late fee, but my advice to you is do not exceed 10% of the payment amount. And in Texas, you cannot go higher than 5% of the monthly payment. Next, this is important. This is something that I encountered when I was researching this. Since this is vacant land, I recommend that you put in your paperwork that you have the right to send the borrower notices electronically. So if you're required or decide to send them a default notice, which is the first notice of default, it's the first step in a foreclosure, you want the right to be able to email that to them in addition to sending it to their last known address. The problem here is that since there's nothing at the subject property, there's no mailbox or anything, you can't really serve them at the vacant land, which means that we want the right to serve them through email electronically. The other thing that I recommend is no prepayment penalty. We actually want to encourage these buyers to pay off the loans as quickly as possible. Late fee I talked about. And previously I talked about if the buyer fails to pay the taxes, you have the right to add escrow and the buyer will pay for the increase in service fees.
I'm going to list all these things that Eric just said in bullet points beneath this video if you guys want to check that out. I'm curious, and you had mentioned earlier, Eric, this thing about the escrow, like you don't charge an escrow for property taxes. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with this, escrow basically just means for every payment that comes in, you're setting aside a small amount and saving that up essentially to pay the annual property tax bill on their behalf each year. So it gives you the benefit of control to make sure the property taxes are paid, but it also gives you more stuff to track and take care of and pay and all this stuff. So, but you had mentioned this sort of, legal maneuver or whatever you want to call it, the language that you insert in there so that if they don't pay the taxes, you can then raise their payment to kind of be made whole for that. Do you have examples of that wording or any of this other stuff? Like, do you have a copy and paste, like, here, title company, put this in there and paste it? Or do you just list these bullet points just as we have them here, like power of sale, and then they get it and they can insert it in there?
So I have that language in all of my documents. I would just communicate to whoever's preparing your documents that you want that in there. If they have no idea what you're talking about, you can contact me and I can kind of walk you through it. And I'm hesitant to provide the language because I'm not an attorney and I don't want it to be kind of construed that I'm providing legal advice to people. That's why I always kind of recommend that people just use a legal department from a title company or an actual attorney. But I'd be happy to kind of give you an idea of what it should sound like from the documents that I use.
One other thing is the mortgage or a deed of trust and not a land contract in terms of the type of loan instrument that you use to set this thing up. And this was something that I was very confused about for years. And I don't think I really got clarity on it until I met you and we started talking about it. But in terms of whether you use a mortgage or a deed of trust, so I don't think we're going to give you that answer necessarily, dear listener or viewer. I'm not going to tell you that because I feel like that's legal advice. But one way to get pretty close to the answer on that is to understand whether you're working in a judicial or a non-judicial foreclosure state, and actually have a map of that spelling out which states are which. Because in most cases, not every case, but in most cases, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Eric, but if it is a judicial foreclosure state, then the answer is to use a mortgage. And if it's a non-judicial foreclosure state, the answer is to use a deed of trust. Is that accurate?
That is accurate in most cases. There are some states that are non-judicial that use a mortgage, but generally a deed of trust is used in non-judicial states and a mortgage is used in judicial states. But your title company and or your lending attorney will know exactly what to use and how to use it.
And on that issue of finding a good lending attorney, so I know this is another little nuanced thing that the average person may not know. So if you just get on Google and search for real estate attorney in this state, that's not necessarily a lending attorney, right? They may not be a specialist in seller financing and mortgages and deeds of trust and land contracts and all this stuff. So what you look for to try to find that specialist is the keyword that you're searching for lending attorney, or is it something else?
So I search default services attorney or creditors' rights attorney. Those are two keywords. I think that the mistake a lot of people make is that they go directly to the real estate attorney. And in my experience, real estate attorneys do closings and they're not as versed in lending law. And really what you want is a foreclosure firm that handles foreclosures for banks because that's pretty much their specialty. They also handle bankruptcy filings, and they will be experts on the language to put in these documents because that's what they deal with all day long in court and with borrowers and with foreclosure trustees, and they'll be able to help you with those documents.
Going back a little bit, when you were talking about using a loan servicing company, so I would agree. I also think that's totally the right answer. And I've had great experiences with the loan services that I've worked with. But I know there's also loan servicing software out there that a lot of people know about, where it is set up so that you can create these amortization schedules and the payments come out electronically and it's managed that way. And it's basically just a robot handling it instead of any human involvement. So there's some overlap, but it's not exactly the same thing. But have you had any experience with loan servicing software, and whether you have or haven't, what does a professional loan servicing company bring to the table that software just can't do?
So I have purchased several loans from other investors who were using that software, and I actually had them boarded at a professional servicer. And I think that one of the things that you have to consider is that how many headaches do you want to have to deal with? I don't want to have to speak to borrowers. I don't want people calling me complaining like, oh, my payment didn't go through. Oh, I didn't get my tax form. And the beauty of a servicer is not only are you not paying for it, because the buyer's paying for it. They do everything. They're calling the borrower if the payment is late. They're collecting that payment. They're dispersing it to you. They have a portal that you can use that you can see all of the servicing comments, all the phone calls, everything. They're going to handle the tax forms. And a lot of cases, the borrower thinks that the servicer owns the loan. They don't even know you're in the picture, which I just love. And it provides an amazing ability to scale this thing when you're using a professional servicer, especially when you're not paying for it.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes total sense.
One other thing here is that they're going to have a license to service loans in the states that they're operating in, which, I'm not sure is required for commercial loans. That's a state by state issue, but it's nice that they are licensed. And they're running a professional organization, and this is what they do with hundreds, if not thousands, of loans.
If you guys and girls need some ideas of different loan servicing companies out there, I'm going to have a list of those beneath this video as well. I wrote a blog post a while back that I called a lot of them to try to figure out where do you work and what do you do and who are your typical clients and what are your fees and all this stuff to try to figure out who some of the better ones were, because they're not all the same. They're not all created equal. So if you need any idea of where to look for that, check out the list below. And just to summarize this, I think we're kind of getting to the end of this thing, Eric, but let's say that I have a loan in place and I want to sell this thing. What does the perfect package look like? When I'm talking to a note buyer, what is it that they're going to want to see included in this file to say, yes, let's do it? This is a great deal.
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you want to sell your loan as very quickly and easily, I recommend that you don't use a land contract, because you're going to have to deed the property to the buyer, and that's going to be an expense and it's going to take more time. I would say have plenty of data ready to establish your property value. That's the first thing, because the buyer is going to want to know, what is this worth and what data shows that it's worth it.
What data do you think is helpful in doing that? Like, are we just talking about printing off Zillow listings of similar properties, or I don't know? What are some specifics that we should have to establish that?
So you can get a BPO if you want, a broker price opinion, and it's basically a realtor that's going to look at some comps. And in some cases, they go and visit the property and they're going to crunch the numbers and they're going to give you an opinion based on their knowledge of the market of what it's worth. That brings some credibility to it. And that usually costs like $100. You could do the data yourself and kind of provide a spreadsheet. Here are the on sale properties. This is what have sold recently. Here's the acreages. Here's the price per acre. You can put a neat package together. But one thing that they're going to be really concerned about is that value. I would expect generally about 70% of the current balance when you sell your loan. They're going to want to see the pay history. They're going to want to see the full loan file from the closing. And once you agree on all of the terms, the way that the sale works is that you're going to ship the documents to the buyer along with an assignment of mortgage or an assignment of deed of trust, which assigns the security instrument. And then you're also going to provide an allonge, which assigns the note. And you're also going to transfer the loan at the servicing company. So how do you get the assignment and allonge? There's a couple of options. You can use a collateral company, and if you contact me, I can make some recommendations for collateral companies that will generate those documents for you. You could also use like a deeds.com. I know that deeds.com sometimes provides those templates that you can purchase. And then ultimately, you're going to ship that, and you can either record the assignment before you ship it, or you can just ship the whole thing and have the buyer record it. But I would say the more organized you are with your information, the easier the sale process is going to go.
Is there a title company involved at all at the point of this note assignment? Like, say you closed the deal 2 years ago and now you're selling the note. So this assignment stuff, you're just on your own to fill this out and do it right? Or is a title company helping with any of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can have a title company help you with it. They'll do it. They'll even handle the money aspect. The only problem is you have to pay them. So they're going to charge probably, I don't know, $500 to $700 for this. I typically just do it on my own. But if you want, I mean, if you wanted to make the seller feel more comfortable with the situation, you could use a title company and then just offer to pay for it.
You may have already mentioned this, but just in case not. So do you want a copy of the lender's policy, the original one that you got at your closing? Is this something that the note buyer is going to want to see in the package too?
So the lender's policy, you do not need the original. You just need a copy of it. So that will probably be in the loan file because the lender's policy usually trails the original loan documents. It usually comes 2 to 3 weeks later.
That's not actually made out to them, right? It's made out to you as the original lender, but it still tells them things were clear at that point in time. So it's still worth something in terms of understanding that much, right?
Yeah, the beauty of a lender's policy is that it's transferable to subsequent lenders because a loan, I've seen loans that have been assigned or sold over 10 times. And that's actually pretty common for a lot of loans in the secondary market. So it's essentially it's for the life of the loan that you have that coverage. So it starts out being made out to the original lender, but you can transfer it, and it just stays with the loan. You don't even have to do anything to transfer it.
Maybe this is kind of assumed in all the stuff we listed out in this package, but yeah, we'll also want the borrower's credit report, their contact info, phone, email, primary residence address. Is that because the new note buyer is going to need to contact them for any reason, or is it just FYI stuff?
So that most of that information will be with the servicer. If they want to keep the loan with the servicer, as most people do, because it's just generally easier because the buyer is used to making that monthly payment to the servicer will keep that information. And if you ever need it, you could just contact them and they'll give it to you. And the other nice thing is that if you have a default, most servicers will handle the default for you for an additional fee. And most servicers have connections with foreclosure attorneys, and you can pay them like $500 and they'll basically handle the full default for you, which is really nice. Yeah, that's a really nice feature of using a servicer.
Yeah, the ones I've worked with in the past, like they have a list of people they can refer me to, but they wouldn't like do it for me. So that's really good to know. That's awesome. I guess that's a good question to ask with whatever loan servicer you're considering is, hey, what kind of help can you provide with this?
Yeah, I've experienced many of the servicers. I've used a lot of them. So if you ever have any questions or need a recommendation on a servicer or an attorney, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to help you.
You might be wondering, how is Eric so smart about all this stuff? How does he know all this? And it's because he does this for a living. He works with land investors, house investors, all kinds of people who deal with seller financing. Maybe I'll just let you take the floor and explain what it is you do, Eric, because you can probably help a lot of people who are listening to this right now.
Yeah, so since 2016, I've been involved in the note industry, and I was buying residential loans on what's called the secondary market, and which is basically after a loan sold by the original lender, it enters the secondary market where they're sold and traded, and it's a really neat business. But I came across land and I thought, what an amazing opportunity for seller financing. And it really is. And I really fell in love with the space. So I am happy to help and assist any way I can. If anyone has any questions about originating a loan or just how to handle a loan or what to do, you can call me on my cell phone or text me or email me, whatever's easiest for you. And so I started out buying land notes, and then I created a program for people who wanted to offer seller financing, but didn't want to hold the note. So what I do is I have a full service program, and I work with the land sellers, and they can offer the seller financing, and I walk them through the whole process. I oversee the paperwork. And at the closing, I purchased the loan for 80% of the sales price. And it's worked out really well. It's been super popular with a lot of people. It's really created a win-win for the buyer, for the seller, and for me, someone who is a note investor.
I've worked with Eric a little bit on some of these, and I've seen what he does, and it's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's an amazing opportunity for a land investor who's trying to sell their property, and maybe they've kind of written off this idea of doing seller financing because it seems too complicated, or they don't want to wait so long to get their cash back. A lot of legitimate reasons for not doing seller financing. But Eric kind of solves most of those problems because he can buy your note, like at closing, for this 80% or whatever the balance is on that loan. Probably depends on the deal. But also he can help with the paperwork and make sure you're doing it right, and just resolve a lot of issues that would otherwise be showstoppers for a lot of people. So whether you're already doing seller financing and you kind of do it begrudgingly because you don't like the negatives about it, or if you have never done it and you've wanted to, but you're kind of scared of it, Eric is a great guy to know for those purposes. So I'll include Eric's contact info, his website, however he wants people to reach out to him. If you decide to do that, I'll include that stuff beneath this video too, if you guys want to reach out to him at some point. Anything else we should cover about this creating the right loan package for the purpose of selling a note?
I just wanted to say I'm happy to help. If you ever have any questions, feel free to contact me. The one thing that we might want to cover is, I have some strong opinions on land contracts. Did you want me to cover my opinions on land contracts?
Yeah, that's actually maybe sort of a different video. So what I'll do is I'll sort of end this video here. We will pick up with part 2, addressing the land contract issue. Basically, why not to use a land contract with seller financing like this. So we'll go ahead and conclude this video here. Thanks everybody for watching. And if you want to check out the next part about land contracts, we'll catch you in the next video.